Fjord's Woodshop is sponsored by Minimax and by I Would Like. Check out their products at iwouldlike.com. Back to Fjord's Woodshop. In the last tool chest video, we cut these dovetails using the bandsaw and a combination of hand tools. In this video, we're going to cut all the internal case joinery, which is dados and grooves, so we can get on to getting the shelves installed and making this box look more like a cabinet. Now yesterday I came out here and I routed this rebate in the case which will house the back panel. Now I did plan on shooting this to show you, but it was a very, well, you know those days where you come out to the workshop and nothing goes to plan? Well, that was yesterday. So I started routing this, my router blew up, I mounted a new router in the table, my camera didn't want to record it. So I've got this rebate, but I can't really show you how I did it. So essentially all I did was I mounted a nice big rebating bit in my router table. I took a pass on the case while it was all assembled, raised the bit up a bit, took another pass, and I just kept doing that until I was left with this rebate, which is the same thickness as the plywood I'm using for the back. Now with the rebate cut, we can move on to getting the dados and grooves all marked out. Now I went ahead and I marked all these components to make sure that we get it back together in the same way and to save a bit of confusion. So on the bottom piece, I've marked it with a B. On the top piece, I've marked it with a T, and that's on the inside faces. And then on these left and right panels, I've just done an arrow which points up, so we always have it in the same orientation and to the front. Now it's not necessary exactly to have the arrow to the front because we have this rebate, but hey, anything we can do to save confusion later on is a big help. With all of that marked out so we can put it back together later on, let's rip it apart and do the marking. Now in the plans I do give recommendations on how wide to make your dados, but really just make it the same size as your closest router bit. So here I've got a router bit which is about 14 millimeters, so I'll make that my wide bit. And here I've got a router bit which is 10 millimeters, and that will be my narrow bit. So while the plans do say 15 mil, I think 14 millimeters will be more than suitable. Now just a quick side note, if you're looking at the first version of these plans and you're building along, here I've actually made a bit of a design change and I've gotten rid of the dados which will house the runners for the drawer slides, because instead of doing that I'm just going to be screwing them into the side of the case. So now marking it out is easy. We've got both boards clamped together up here so they can't move. I've ensured that these knife lines which are left over from our dovetails are perfectly lined up with my square here. And we're just going to mark both boards at the same time. So we'll take the measurements directly off the plans. And the only thing we're altering is the fact that if you're not using the same size router bits, just change the width of those dados. Okay, so there's our small dado and our big dado marked. Now I'm just going to mark the stop points, and that's 15 millimeters in from the front edge. It will be where we stop. Now on the left-hand piece here, we've also got a square shelf that needs dados, so we'll only mark that on the one board, of course. There we have it, there's our dado. So we've got a stop here, which is 15 millimeters in from each edge here, so at the front edges. We've got our thicker dado, which will house our shelf. Here's our narrow dado, which is the sort of drawer divider or the dust divider, whatever you want to call that. And then on this right-hand side piece, we've also got these two dados, which will house the square shelf. So with all of that done, let's set up to cut these dados here. Now to ensure that these dados line up perfectly when we go to align it, we're going to cut them both at the same time. So I still have my boards clamped together, except this time I've also got this straight edge which I've got clamped in position, which will act as a fence for the router. And I've also got the top piece here holding the boards nice and flat to the workbench, so I can be sure that we get a fairly even cut across the entire dado. As far as the process I'm using, I've got my router set up already with the correct depth on its depth stop, which is 5 millimeters for both these dados. And we're just going to plunge in at either end of the dado at full depth, so where we did those stop marks. And then we'll come back and do probably 2 to 3 passes until we've got a dado, which is 5 millimeters deep across the entire length. So with all of that done, let's get this thing cut. Okay, so there's the first dado cut. We're at full depth, so I'll just change the bit over to be the smaller 10mm bit and repeat that process for the next dado. That's the two dados which will house the shelf and the sort of drawer divider or dust shelf or whatever it is you want to call it. Now up here we've got these two dados which is for the square shelf. but that's only going to be done on the one side. So I've unclamped the boards so I don't accidentally cut them both at the same time, and we'll do it in the exact same way. Now to finish off these dados, we've just got to square up the ends. So to do that, we're paring away with a sharp chisel. Okay, so that's all of these dados here cut. So now let's get on to fitting this shelf. Now, we've still got this a little bit too long, so we've got to cut this down to length before we cut the tenon. And I've marked that here. And to figure that out, all I did was take the bottom board here, measure it between the pins, and got that exact measurement, and then added 10 millimeters. So we've got two 5mm deep dados, 2 times 5 is 10, and that gives us this final length of 577 for this particular case. Your measurement will be different. So from here, I'll take it to the miter saw, I'll cut it to length, and then we'll set up to cut the tenon. Now to cut the tenon, I'm going to use my router table, and I've got it set up with a straight cutting bit here. Well, technically it's a rebedding bit, but hey, it will do. And I've also taken several test passes with the offcut from the shelf here to get a tenon which is fitting the dado just right. So it's the correct thickness and the correct depth. So from here, I'll just run the draw through the router table twice. And the only special thing here is I'm using this backing board here. So that will just help me keep the shelf nice and square as I push it through. Okay, so there's the shelf fitting really nicely. So I also went ahead and I notched the tenon so we could actually have it sitting flush to the case, and I just used a handsaw for that and then cleaned it up with a chisel like we do on the dovetails, I guess. So now all we have to do is mark it and cut it to its final width. So that's just to be flush with this edge here. So with a sharp pencil, I'll just transfer that line right there. We'll rip that to width, and then this shelf will be done. Okay, so that's the shelf fitting really nicely. So it's nice and flush on the back, nice and flush on the front here, and the shoulder line is really nice. So I'm super pleased with the way that one's come out. Now from here we have to move on to do the drawer divider as well as the square shelf, but it's getting pretty late in the day, so I'll come back and we'll start fresh tomorrow morning. Now the remaining components for this project are even easier to install than the shelf because there's no need to cut a tenon, as we're bringing the workpieces to be the same thickness as the dados, and that really will speed things up. So here I've got some stock that I prepared a few days ago just by bringing it down to rough thickness and flattening it. And now I'm going to send it back through the thickness planer until it's the same thickness as those dados. So in my case it's 10 millimeters. Okay, so that's how you want it. So it's still quite tight in there. So once we finish sanding this thing to 120, it should be a perfect slip fit. Okay, so with the shelf now fitting nicely, I'm just going to cut it to width at the miter saw. Then, just like we did with the shelf, I'll cut that notch and we'll also rip it to width. Okay, so that's that shelf there, or the drawer divider, fitting really nicely. Now, unfortunately down here, I did wander a bit with my saw and I cut in, which is a little bit ugly because there's a gap, but luckily that's going to be hidden by a drawer front, so you'll never see it. And when we do glue this thing up, I'll put a little wedge in there as well, and that will just make sure that it's not blindingly obvious if the drawers aren't in place. Now, the next thing that we need to do is install this square shelf, and if you're a George's Woodshop patron at the $10 per month level, this is going to be your exclusive video for this project. So I'll detail all the steps that I use for installing and making this square shelf. Now for the rest of us, it's the exact same procedure that we've already been using, except the components are a bit smaller. So we've got one more dado to cut, and we'll cut that in the exact same way. So there's a dado in this shelf piece. So with the fence and the router, we've got a dado to cut in the upright, and as that's a through dado, we're going to be using the router table instead, as it's a little bit easier for those smaller components. And other than that, we've just got to cut things to length, notch the pieces so they come flushed with the front of the case, and that's pretty much it. So it's going to be a very quick and easy procedure for that square shelf. Okay, so there we have it. We have a tool chest that is starting to look like a tool chest. Now, what I'm going to do from here is just take it all apart again, sand all of the components and reassemble it, and then from there I'll be fitting the back panel, but that is just measuring the inside dimensions, ripping it to width and cross-cutting it to length and just placing it in there. So not really any need to show you guys all of that because I'm sure you know what it looks like to sand something. So that will do it for this video. In the next video we'll go ahead and actually start building the drawer boxes and the drawer fronts, and also do the glue up of the main case assembly here, and then from there we'll move on to getting the door fitted and some tool management, so figuring out how we're going to keep the hand planes in place, putting the saws in there and all of that sort of fun stuff, which is a bit of problem solving. So like always, thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you click that thumbs up button down below, leave a comment, and also share around with anyone that you might know who may be interested. If you want to help support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. So we've got plans for this tool chest which are available that you can purchase through my George's Woodshop store, and all of those purchases, all the money from that I should say, go directly into the show and really does help me out. Now if you don't want to purchase these plans, you can also do a one-time donation over at my donation page, and you can do whatever dollar amount you wish, and it really does help things out and it's really appreciated. So for all of those that have donated, a huge thanks to you. And it's really helping things here in the shop. Now lastly, you can also become a patron, which is a monthly dollar amount that you specify, so there's several levels there, and in return you get things like discounts on plans, early bird access to content. At the higher level you get exclusive content, so like in this project we've done this square shelf as an exclusive part of the build that only those guys get to see. Discounts and all sorts of things, so giveaways eventually, and yeah, cool things through Patreon. So if you want to know more about that, head over to my Patreon page, all the details are there, and you can decide if you want to become a patron, and it really does help things to a huge amount. Just knowing that I have that little bit of cash coming in every month means that I can sort of budget for builds and all sorts of things, which really is quite important. So like always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.